Members connected to nearly 20 shootings are off city streets. After a 2-year investigation, more than a dozen people have been arrested accused of violent crime.
Brooklyn District Attorney Eric Gonzalez announcing the charges Wednesday and then reading text messages exchanged between those alleged gang members, describing the disappointment that they didn't shoot and kill their intended target.
They say it's a bad drill, and the person that we allege, Antoine Favorite, says, how was it a bad drill? He's asking, like, how was it a bad drill? We chased, they shot at their rivals.
For a long time, the Bloods were a gang that you seen only on the West Coast. But in time, the Bloods would show up in New York. Omar Porti, known as OG Mack, is a name that resonates in the history of East Coast gang culture. Born in New York City in the 1960s, he played a crucial role in the formation of the United Blood Nation, which would become one of the most notorious gang networks on the East Coast, including in the New York State prison system, New York City, and on the island. His influence, however, would ultimately lead to his downfall as cops sought to silence him and his power in the streets of New York. They would crack down on the organization he helped create, and in time, they would get him. OG Mack grew up in Harlem, New York during a time when gang culture was evolving rapidly. As a young man, he found himself involved in street life, eventually leading to criminal activities that resulted in his incarceration. It was during his time behind bars that OG Mack's legacy truly began to take shape. In the early 1990s, the prison system in New York was dominated by the Latin Kings, a powerful Hispanic gang that often preyed on African American inmates. In response, OG Mack, alongside Leonard Deadeye McKenzie, they would seek to establish an organization that could provide protection for black prisoners. This led to the birth of the United Blood Nation in 1993 on Rikers Island. OG Mack and McKenzie modeled their new group after the West Coast Bloods, adopting their symbols, language, and culture. However, the UBN was an independent organization within its own structure, separate from the California Bloods. Initially, the gang's main purpose was self-defense, but as it grew, it evolved into a powerful criminal enterprise. Through recruitment of youngsters in New York City, both inside and outside of prison, the Bloods rapidly expanded throughout New York and beyond. They would take over the prison system from Attica to Comstock. They would become the most powerful gang in New York State prison. The gang would engage in a range of illicit activities, according to cops, that included drug trafficking, robbery, and violent assaults. If you got caught on the island violating the Blood, you could expect to be cut in the face. The 59 Brims, one of the prominent blood sets, emerged within this network, operating under the broader UBN umbrella, but maintaining its own leadership. OG Mack was instrumental in unifying various independent blood factions under the UBN banner. His influence spread beyond prison walls as gang members on the streets of New York adopted the Blood identity, creating a surge in gang-related violence in the mid to late 1990s. The UBN quickly became one of the most feared and organized gangs on the East Coast. OG Mack's ability to command loyalty and install a sense of unity among gang members made him a powerful figure and a powerful leader. Some would do whatever he asked. However, his growing influence also made him a target for law enforcement, who were determined to dismantle the criminal empire he had helped build. In the early 2000s, authorities intensified their efforts to bring down the leadership of UBN. In 2002, Omar OG Mack was arrested and charged with multiple crimes, including racketeering, conspiracy, and drug trafficking. His conviction would lead to a 50-year prison sentence, effectively removing him from the streets and crippling his ability to lead the organization. Despite his incarceration, the United Blood Nation and its affiliate sets, including the 59 Brims, continued to operate in a more fragmented manner. Without a central figure like OG Mack to maintain order, infighting and rivalries began to weaken the structure he had once established. OG Mack's creation of the United Blood Nation forever changed the landscape of gang culture on the East Coast, especially in New York City. His ability to unite individuals under a common banner allowed the Bloods to expand their influence, but it also contributed to widespread violence and criminal activity. Today, his legacy is a cautionary tale about the rise and fall of gang leaders and the impact of organized crime on urban communities. Eventually, OG Mack would meet a downfall that should never come with who he once was. OG Mack was reportedly labeled a snitch while in the feds. After his conviction, there was widespread allegations that he had cooperated with law enforcement to reduce his sentence or provide information on the UBN and its operations. Documents and testimonies surfaced suggesting that he had given details about gang activities, which is a number one violation, that would lead to many members of the Bloods to turn against him. As a result, OG Mack lost credibility and respect within the gang community. Many Blood sets distanced themselves from him, and some even placed a green light, a hit order on him due to the allegations of cooperation with authorities. His status as a founder of the UBN did not protect him from being ostracized by the very organization he once helped create. Even behind bars, OG Mack remains a figure of significance in gang history. His story serves as both a reflection of the harsh realities of street life and an example of how power and influence can lead to both success and downfall in the world of organized crime. The Brims gang, which had stood for Black Revolutionary Militant Soldier, has its roots in Los Angeles, California, dating back to the late 1960s as one of the original factions of the Blood Street Gang. Initially, the Brims were a separate entity, but by the 1970s, they merged into the Bloods network as a response to the growing threat from the Crips. By the late 1980s and early 1990s, the Brims, like other Blood sets, expanded to the East Coast, particularly in New York City through the prison system. At Rikers Island, where the Latin Kings and Nietas had dominant control, the Bloods formed as a response to protect black prisoners. Over time, the Bloods split into various subsets, with the 59 Brims becoming one of the most organized and violent factions. By the 2000s, the 59 Brims had a stronghold in Brooklyn, the Bronx, and parts of Queens, engaging in drug trafficking, robbery, and violent territorial disputes. They thought they owned the property. They maintained alliances with other Blood subsets, but frequently clashed with other gangs in New York. The 59 Brims and the Bloodhound Brims became two of the most notorious sets operating in the 5 boroughs. Unlike some of the more loosely affiliated Blood groups, the Brims were known for their militant structure, with ranks such as big homies or OGs, high-ranking members who would make major decisions. They also had little homies, lower-ranking members often used as foot soldiers. If they were told to do something, they would do it. And then they would have the peewees, young recruits, sometimes as young as 13 or 14, tasked with committing violent crimes to earn status, knowing that they might not get locked up too long. The Brims were also known for their strict codes of conduct. A violation of gang rules often resulted in physical punishments, or worse, death. Throughout the 2000s and 2010s, the Brims became deeply entrenched in Brooklyn's gang culture, engaging in drug trafficking, cocaine, heroin, and fentanyl, gun smuggling from southern states through the Iron Pipeline, extortion and robberies targeting businesses and rivals. Deadly feuds with Folk Nation, Crip sets, and other Blood factions was all part of their life. By the early 2020s, the 59 Brims had become one of the most feared and active gangs in Brooklyn, particularly in Coney Island, Sheepshead Bay, and Brownsville. For years, the 59 Brims and their allies engaged in a brutal turf war with rival gangs, particularly the Folk Nation, escalating tensions in the Coney Island and Sheepshead Bay areas. What followed was a trail of retaliatory violence fueled by revenge, social media taunts, and a relentless pursuit of gang dominance. Some would go on social media posting threats and rapping about shots that were missed. Their way was brewing with the Folk Nation members in New York, but it always will be the Bloods that have a stronghold in New York on the streets. In Rikers Island and in the New York State prison system, the war and their way of life was getting ready to take off. The all-out war that would claim the lives of others would come to a head when 17-year-old Devontae Lewis, also known as Dior, got smoked in broad daylight. He was a Bloodhound Brim member, according to police reports. He would be shot and killed outside the Urban Dove Charter School in Midwood, Brooklyn. The target execution done by Folk Nation affiliates in broad daylight. Malachi Sims, at 15 years old, and Karan Smith, 16, both of Flatbush, Brooklyn, would eventually be arrested for putting Dior's lights out. Even though they were arrested and looking at serious time in New York, they could care less. They were doing everything for their gang, and the Bloods had become their target. For the 15-year-old Malachi, 15 to life, and for Karan, a quarter, 25 to life. It would send shockwaves to the young gunners on the other side when Dior was shot and killed, and they were ready for action. Any ops could get got, and nothing mattered. In February 2022, alleged members of the 59 Brims gang were involved in a shooting incident in Coney Island. On February 8, 2022, Amagorilla Amatosho and another member would bust their guns, busting them on a rival gang member at 2926 West 25th Street in Coney Island. The gunfire would erupt in a building lobby occupied by residents, including children. People would run for cover screaming, fearing that they might lose their lives at the hands of a stray bullet. On that cold February day, no one would be hit, but the message to the ops and the people in the community was simple. Brutal violence was here. The Brims and Bloodhounds were not giving up. They were out to eliminate the Folk Nation members. They would set their sights on 2 Folk Nation members outside an apartment complex, and when they showed up, they would let bullets fly. One of the men shot would survive, but would suffer permanent injuries. The gang had got him nothing but a lifetime of pain. With the beef escalating, a young 59 Brim member would take shots at a Crip who would survive. One of the homies would text the reckless shooter, "How you miss at that range? You got to make sure they don't get up." With guns going off, the community would live in fear, knowing that gang wars with kids as young as 13 and 14 were popping off. Bullets have no names, and kids could be killed by other kids. Parents were afraid to send their kids outside. Little did the young gunners know, the NYPD and the Brooklyn's DA office was reining in on them. All the dirty inner workings of the streets would be put to test. Cops would be able to infiltrate the gang with undercover informants. People that said they lived by the street, lived by the code of the street, would now become snitches. People that were linked would work for the cops to avoid going to jail. They would be suited up with wires attending the gang meetings and get information to the cops. As the cops listened in, they would learn of plots to kill and how the Brims and Bloodhounds were operating. With the informants, cops would get wiretaps and start watching social media pages, all while letting the gang members build their own cases against themselves. Cameras were out, and the Brims were being tracked by the cops like bloodhounds. But these bloodhounds were working to make sure these boys get until the sun burns out inside the New York State prison system. After at least 20 shootings and some bodies dropping, the New York cops could wait no more. Operation Baywatch would come to an end. After 3.5 years of sitting back building a case, the cops were ready to stop the violence that had been wreaked by the 59 Brims and the Bloodhound gang members. 14 gang members from 15 years old to 30 would be arrested on a 129-count indictment outlining shootings, murders, and attempted murders. For now, only some of the 59 Brims and Bloodhound members have been silenced. But will the arrest end the wars?
Stop playing with this Brim shit! Bun you up!
I want to dedicate it to Pee-wee and Lacey. 5'9" Brims, stand up.